Episode 34 of the World Builders and I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram, and today's topic is world building fantasy state history. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world? Do you need more? Does it make sense? Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination. This is the place that will help prime your mind. Now, it's time to heat up the forge, break out the mithril ingots and hammer. Welcome to the World Builders Anvil. I'm your host, Jeffrey W. Ingram. Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Thank you for listening again. And as always, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review our show on iTunes. Or go to garduel.com and sign up for my newsletter. That way you can get the cultural mind map. And there's going to be more freebies that start getting sent out, in addition to some world maps that I have up there, and just some other food for inspirational thought. When we talk about fantasy state history, I want to get more specifically about the kinds of things I look at. And there's a couple ways, if you're going to share this with the world outside of your story, that you can do that. You can choose to share it from the perspective of the country or someone else in the story who might or might not be from the state, or you can share it from terms of this is an encyclopedic look at an actual country. And some risks there. If you start talking about the future of countries, if you know them in an encyclopedia standpoint, you might give spoilers away to what's going to happen in your stories. So I would advise don't do that unless you really want to. Some other important things to remember. The history of a country is the truth as the country remembers it. For example, you hear a lot of talk in the United States about what the separation of church and state means. Or what's the difference between a big and a small government? What did the founders of our country mean when they wrote the Constitution? And honestly, anyone who says they know that at this point is full of it. And they might have a really good idea. They might even be being honest. They might be taking letters written in people's hands about certain topics, but they're ultimately describing hearsay as what it would be called in court. You know, it's someone's version of what someone who is dead said. They might be very convincing, and you might or might not believe them. You have to understand, ultimately, unless you can be in the mind of the person when they're doing it, you don't really know what they thought. And for any historical event, that matters. Because what's going to be recorded by the culture's history is going to be things probably in a positive look at the country. Later on, you might get in the part where you can start criticizing yourself for your historical mistakes, to where you treated someone poorly. And that would be good to do as a country, but especially early on if you're talking about, anywhere up to sort of a modern culture, doing that might be considered treason and could be a head-losing offense. And we don't like to lose our head to an offense. And the other thing you might want to remember, too, is things I list here might or might not be relevant to the culture you're working with or the state you're working with. You want to look at the state and cultural norms and realize that things that are important to the state and the cultures who are involved is going to be based off of their ideals. And these are just ones that I think of because I read stuff from encyclopedias, and that made me think of certain things that you should see about a state. Or I used to look at the old gazetteers, and I got an idea of what should be in these things. So, wars. Wars are a common one. History is often stories of leaders and great generals who are fighting the good fight. And whether they are or not, it typically ignores all of the other people who are trapped in the scenario. Whether it ends up in their benefit or against them, when we think of histories, it's usually about the leaders and the generals. So war is a big one that you're going to look at. Did you win? Did you lose that war? Usually, if you survive the war, you consider it a victory. However, if major objectives are missed, well, usually you might think of it as a loss. Well, if your state is occupied, then it's obviously a loss. And maybe even if you occupy the opponent, you may be still lost. You just haven't really lost the war didn't end when you thought it would. Turmoil, famine, natural disasters. Heck, large migrations of completely different cultural people, could all lead to turmoil in a country. And turmoil is never good. It could be social unrest. It could be disease. You get a plague, that's turmoil. So what forms of turmoil affect a country? In the United States, like the Civil War would be an example of the war. The period afterwards, what we call Reconstruction, is also a major part you look at in U.S. history because it was important to the United States. A lot of times we'll look at history-wise for the United States from, the colonies through maybe the War of 1812, and then right before the Civil War through the 19th century, and then maybe the 1920s through the 1950s, and then you start getting closer than that, and I'd argue you're really still in current events. When too many people are alive, you're not really looking at it in a historical context. It's still really a current event. Even if it happened 30 years ago, it's still really a current event. There's too many emotions and people tied too closely to the events to try and be rational with the way they think about it. Major expansions is another area I have to look at. Was it war for land or just an expansion? Maybe there were no people there or no things you consider people. Maybe you just built colonies. A major war for more territory, or you gain territory in some other way. Let's say you landed on an empty planet with no life that is sentient. You would probably consider that the acquisition of the planet. Landfall on the planet would definitely be a major historical event, especially early in the spacefaring age of a state. Trade, and this isn't your local trade, this is your major trade. When you pick up trade to China for the first time from Europe, that's major. Or even India. Or, depending on how far you can travel easily, hitting that extremity or beyond would be an historical achievement. Marco Polo, woohoo, go Italy. Well, even though I don't think he would have considered himself a member of the state of Italy. Science, major science achievements. And you can make some argument that most science achievements are based on the acquisition of war prowess for a state, and then they leak out from there into the rest of the culture, and that might or might not be true. I don't get too worked up into that, but if you come up with something major, and it might not even seem major, it might be refrigeration. To me, that's a major event in history. Other people might not think much about it, especially today. It's so common. We refrigerate houses, skyscrapers. What's refrigeration? It's nothing. It was really very important. It allows you to settle in places that are hotter than you like. It allows you to make your life more comfortable. And lights. I can now work when it's dark outside. We now have a global 24/7 economy because of lights and refrigeration. Magic. Same thing as science. If you start discovering new powerful ways to employ magic for the purposes of the state or within that state, that will be an achievement. If you had a nation like, say, the United States today, and I figured out how to teleport from here to the Central Mall of Washington, D.C., and I just appeared there, and I could start teleporting, let's say, within 300 miles of where I was. That would be a major historical event. Not all magic, Gee, I can fertilize my ground better through magic. And some of the things I think we look at in a flawed way. We always think of magic as in, ways to summon demons and do these really big, powerful, over-the-top visual things. I think if at least humans had magic, it would be more focused on how to make your life easier. How do I farm my land without so much effort? Or how do I get more return when I do farm on my land? How do I get more work done? That would probably be the focus of most magic. Fireballs, where they're really cool, would be less useful. Now, the state might work heavily on that part, but, me, I would just need to know how to light a fire quicker. Just go touch my fireplace or look at it and heat rays burn it up. Well, not the fireplace, but wood inside the fireplace. Hopefully I wouldn't burn my whole house down. Exploration, the discovery of new things, especially wonders of the world, are huge. If you're from an area that has no mountains, and you can see some off in the distance, and so some people go off from your primitive culture in that direction, and within there you find this one mountain that sticks out. It's 30 times the height. Stories of that mountain are going to leap back, and people are going to make cultural assumptions on that mountain based off of its existence. Discoveries, exploration, finding new things would probably be of major importance in history. Periods of stagnation. These are ones that we don't often look at in history books, but maybe we should, It's not just, in periods of depression or expansion that are important, but what happens when the state really stops growing? Everyone else is growing around them. They catch up or excel past them, and that state becomes in trouble on the way. So if there's a period of stagnation, and maybe we kind of do, like we talk about the Great Depression lasting for a long time, but maybe it was a bad drop and then stagnant for 15 years afterwards. Major new discoveries, and this kind of goes in with exploration as well too. New power. We've learned how to encompass the power of gas or a star. We can now build a Dyson sphere. Very important historically. New types of geography. If we are a landlocked state that does farming with a few minor rivers, and over time, as we're probably exploring the rivers first because they're quicker to travel on, when we get to that ocean, and I'm from Indiana in the modern age. When I first saw the ocean, I was blown away. I mean, heck, the first time I saw a Great Lake, my mind was blown away because I had never been at a body of water I could not see the other side of. This would, and maybe I'm wrong here, and you can run your world however you want to, I think this would be a major impact on the world. A new item in the night sky. This is something else I talked about from geography. That green comet that around Christmas flew over the Earth. The further back in history, the more impact it has. The less sophisticated people are to understand that event, it's going to be important. Like the first time Halley's Comet was noticed, it was probably a major significant event in a culture. If that culture was around when the next one came 76 years later, I believe it's every 76 years, they would be even bigger, like, oh my goodness, what does this cycle mean to us? They would drive you crazy. And most people are curious. We might be cautious in our curiosity, but we're curious. So we'd wonder about the effect of seeing this new item would have on us. And then through the lens of the culture or cultures involved in a state, that would depend on what happens. Maybe it leads to a period of turmoil or a period of perceived prosperity. The rating for this episode is basic. For me, the history of the state you're in is a basic thing you have to know. World building task for the day is to take the state you've been working on the last couple episodes and go ahead and rethink, do your categories that you covered when you put your state together at first. Would there be things on this list that you did not cover? Or are there things important to the culture of that state that would make you think, wait, for some reason I have no farming things listed in the agricultural society. We've come up with a new plow in 1422. Why is that not listed? It would be like, in Spain, it not making the news that Christopher Columbus found new land. The real world task for the day, pick one task that you hate and find out if there's a different, better way you can do it. And for me, it's laundry, and I hate doing laundry. I help my wife a lot with laundry. She's a tax accountant, so especially from January through April, I typically do a lot more laundry than she does, and that kind of balances out throughout the year. But with all the stuff she does, that's one of the things I try and help pick up for her. But I hate doing it. So one of the things I try to do is whenever a laundry thing fills up, I just do the load right then, so I don't have 15 loads. And it could be other things too. If you have the budget and you hate laundry and you want to ship your laundry out and have someone do it for you, and you and your loved ones decide that's an important thing for the family, there's nothing wrong with automating tasks you don't want to do if you can afford. Like probably two of the first things my wife and I pay for once we have finished paying off our debt, day-to-day cleaning in the house and yard work. It'll be that simple. Probably the first two things we automate in our life once we get our debt paid off. The tease for the episode is my third interview, and this is with the amazing Aaron Wood, a friend of mine and an artistic dungeon master geek through and through. And as always, make sure to go to Garduel.com. That's GARDUL.com for the show notes. It'll be under podcasting, World Builders Anvil. That's a great place to get all of the information from the episode that you've just listened to and to see all the resources that we've talked about in this episode. Thanks for joining us this episode of the World Builders Anvil. Please be sure to rate and review us in iTunes, and please help get the word out to your friends about our show. And join me, Jeffrey W. Ingram at GarDuel.com, to see the progress of my world and learn why I made the choices I did. And please contact me and let me know the topics you would love to hear in the future. Now strike, while the myth rolls high.